Welcome to the Security Operations section of the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architectures. My name is Mark Simos. I'm lead cybersecurity architect at Microsoft.
And my name is John Dellinger. I'm a chief security advisor here at Microsoft, and I work in our Cyber Defense Operations Center. Security teams today face an overwhelming amount of inbound information when they're doing security operations. A veritable river of inbound security data exceeds our human ability to process that information in a timely manner. So today we're going to talk about some of the concerns that fall out of that and how we approach them.
Yeah, so when we take a look at security operations, which is kind of the pointy end of the spear when you look at the overall security organization, this is where you have to deal with the active attacks, the realized risk where an attacker, oftentimes a live human, has gained access to the environment. And the two top elements, the two top concerns that organizations have, because it's such a flood, as John said, or a river of information coming at them, is that it's easy to get caught up in a false positive, a false alarm. And so security operations is constantly worried about, am I missing a real detection in all this river of noise? And then, there's a second concern, which is if I'm spending all my time and effort doing that, which is tiring out the analysts and making life difficult, these attackers are essentially operating freely and they're getting more access and access to more resources. They're able to do more damage to the organization during that time. And so this is really what most security operations organizations are really concerned about in our experience. So the way that we look at, okay, how do you address these concerns? Because these are very real concerns. We take a look at this sort of massive amount of data as potentially a funnel, because what you want to do is you want to get the information that you need at the end of the funnel, in a manner and at a volume that human investigators can actually handle and investigate, because the amount of attacks that you see is something that humans can digest. So the way that we think about this is by enforcing quality. And so we want to make sure that for those alert feeds that are generating alerts, those indicators that, hey, there's a real attacker here, we want to make sure there's a very high chance that it's actually an attacker, a true positive, as opposed to a false positive. And so that's a very key metric that we enforce in security operations to make sure that we've got, when we see an alert, it's not a false alarm. And a couple of technologies that help us get that massive amount of potential signal down into something that can be digested by humans are machine learning and behavior analytics. Machine learning is basically probability mathematics at the end of the day. It's, the whole discipline of machine learning is part of artificial intelligence, so you might hear that terminology as well. But ultimately, it's probability mathematics, where you can run these probability algorithms over a large amount of data. And then behavior analytics, and that helps by not having to have humans literally read every one of a log file, because how many folks in security operations have heard, oh, just read the logs? Yeah, that's not practical. Now, the other technology that really helps a lot is behavior analytics. So I happen to live in Florida, and so it'd be very unusual for me, especially during pandemic quarantine lockdown, to log in or be in a different physical location, for example. But if you're looking at the entire organization and all the different places, New York and California, Zimbabwe and Paris and London and all over the world, it would be very unusual for me to log into one of those locations. Whereas we have employees all over there, and there are people that are actually logging in legitimately from there. So by looking at my individual behavior as a single entity, we can pull out the useful, interesting alerts from there. So those technologies really do help getting to that point where when we put an alert in front of an analyst, it's pretty easy to see that it's a true positive. So then as we look at the response process, past the detection piece, and we start the analyst looking at the alert and doing the investigation and trying to figure out where the attack went, looking left, looking right, and then remediating it. The thing that we look at is, for that human part of the process, is two different key metrics: mean time to acknowledge and mean time to remediate. So how long is that little virtual blinky light blinking? That's mean time to acknowledge before someone actually starts working on it. And then mean time to remediate, which is after they start working on it, that first action they take within the investigation workflow, how long does it take before the attacker no longer has access to the environment, to the organization's resources? And so that first period is the mean time to acknowledge, from the time it happened to the time that we did something about it, started. And then how long to actually get to remediation when the risk itself is no longer in the organization actively. And a key enabler of that is what's often referred to as SOAR technology, security, operations, automation, and remediation, because this helps, this basically automates a lot of manual tasks. It connects tools together so that security operations analysts don't have to do a lot of manual human tasks. A lot of it is simply done for them by the response systems. You'll never be able to take the humans out of the process, of course, but because ultimately the attackers are always innovating. But it is very, very important to empower those people to help them make their job as easy as possible and take care of those things that we know we can do, and do it at machine speed.
Okay, so our security operations model is derived from this approach of having to deal with both high volume incidents and highly complex incidents. So the high volume incidents are, repetitive, they're similar to each other, but they still need a pair of human eyes to look at them. And so we have this multi-tier system to deal with that. And as we go up in the tiers, we sort of hand off for those highly complex incidents to have a dedicated incident response to them. So we've gotten away from the tier nomenclature. We feel that it suggests a linear and hierarchical sort of stacked ranking of people working at different tiers, and it also doesn't really describe what they do in those tiers. So we're calling tier 1 triage now. And so that's what they do. They're doing high volume, high speed triage and remediation of incidents. I like to use the analogy of an EMT in the back of an ambulance, the first person on scene to look at someone with an injury. They have a checklist. They're highly skilled in patching up that person. They're going to do whatever they can to take care of that on scene. They don't want to put that person in the ambulance and send them to the emergency room. But if they do, that's going to be the role of a doctor in the ER. So that's when we get to our investigations analyst. So this is someone like a doctor who's highly skilled in their area of expertise. In our case, it's someone from a product group or a specific team within the company. They have knowledge about that product or that service or the data involved there. And so they're going to do a deep analysis on that alert or on that incident. And hopefully they'll be able to remediate it or patch it up then and take care of it. If not, if it's more complex, if it's got further reaching implications throughout the business, then it's going to get escalated to our incident response, which is a team of dedicated analysts, reactive hunters, and even some business coordinators, project manager types, who are able to go out and coordinate across our enterprise to bring in all of the stakeholders who might be impacted by that incident.
So, and the key is that not everyone has has the same level of resources that we would have internally at Microsoft. We recognize that. But we have learned that these are distinct functions or hats people wear, jobs to be done. And so that's really, where we assign kind of those classic tier model numbers, which again, we don't use to describe the people at all, but to describe sort of the escalation process. And the idea here is that you have folks that are really good at the technology and the security elements of it, but then there's a separate set of folks, for example, that incident management in the top right. They're really good at the business coordination and working with legal and PR and comms as appropriate, and bringing them in. And so sometimes that's done by the security operations lead, in a smaller organization, but they might become a dedicated team. If you're if you're attacked all the time by sophisticated attackers like a financial services institution. And so the key is that these are really the jobs to be done within security operations. So don't think that you have to have a team for each of these. It might be talented people that can play multiple roles as needed.
That's right. And of course, all of this is overlaid across the business model, right? So we've got our privacy duty people in here. We've got our compliance people that might be called into an incident. We've got representatives from the product groups and so on. And we've got to coordinate with them to remediate and to tackle these incidents.
Yeah, and IT operations plays a huge role in this, and depending on how much you adopt DevOps, also the DevOps teams as well, because ultimately, you're not gonna reinstall a server as security operations analyst. That's going to be the folks that are um, actually own and operate the server and know who the business stakeholders are and how many users use it, et cetera. And so there's a really deep partnership within IT operations and the rest of the organization for security operations.
And then threat intelligence is weaved through the whole thing. The threat intel has a role to play across all of the levels of the different tiers and so on. We embed threat intelligence into the CDOC to provide real-time operationalized threat intel to give these analysts and incident responders an idea of what they're up against and to provide some context around the threat actor, their tactics, techniques, and procedures, their capability and intent, and so on. These same threat intel folks are also playing a strategic role. They're taking the aggregate of these lessons learned from the various incidents we see, both internally and the ones they're researching that we see happening out in the wild, and providing our strategic decision makers with some context around trends and what we see happening in our own enterprise over time.
Yeah, and I just want to, before we move on to the next one, I just want to add a little bit of emphasis to what John said, is that it's not just the technical specific indicators of compromise and specific technical information that need to be lessons learned so that you don't have to keep learning the same thing over and over again. But it's also that strategic element, like what groups are targeting the organization, what are the motivations, and being able to sort of process that from both your internal and external sources so that you're able to advise security leaders and the architects and the defensive posture, as well as business leaders as appropriate, with, hey, this is what we're seeing, and this is what you need to be prepared for. These are the things to integrate into your threat model and into your investments.
And Mark, I'll also just say that this also comes back to our security education and awareness folks, not strictly a SecOps process, but they are taking these lessons learned that our threat intel folks are gathering and reporting on, and they are disseminating that to our workforce in education awareness packages, little training packages, videos, posters, and whatever.
Yeah, and the regular training that we're required to take just as a normal employee of the company does have real world incidents and context in it, so that folks understand, hey, this is what we're actually facing, which I think is kind of cool. So revisiting back to those MTTA and MTTR, because that really is in many ways sort of the process, the process version of a North Star, that this is what we want to be, good at. We want to make sure it takes the least amount of time to get an analyst on an incident, investigating it and taking it to remediation if it's a real one, and then being able to remediate that as quickly as possible. So, it's a very human-centric discipline. This is not something you can automate and be done with and say, oh, we just take care of the automation. It is very human-centric. We want the automation to be there to make their life as easy as possible. But ultimately, the attackers are always innovating. They're always trying something new. So there will always be intelligent humans in the security operations, as far as we can anticipate. When you take a look at the classic approach for security operations, I can't tell you how many times I've been told, oh, just give me the logs and we'll put it in the SIM and we're fine. And that's actually a valid thing to do, because you need to be able to do deep investigation. You'd have correlation for it. But we've learned, that was one of the first things that we learned at Microsoft, is that that's not enough, because oftentimes you'd have to wait 30, 45, 60, 90 days to be able to get a high quality query that you can generate an alert from that is actionable by an analyst, and it's not a false positive that burns them out, wastes their time, and makes them wonder, is there better tooling in another SOC where they don't have to deal with a bunch of false positives, right, and morale and retention issues and whatnot. So the first thing that Microsoft invested in is what we now call XDR technology, Extended Detection and Response. And this is very much taking the concept of an EDR, an endpoint detection and response, and essentially applying it generically across a lot of different technologies. So what sets this apart from simply taking the event logs and then running queries against it, which again has value, especially in the hunting space, is that you essentially have a tool that is focused on a particular asset to know it really well. It's not limited to, hey, whatever event logs are turned on, it uses those event logs, but it also, in the case of an endpoint, it can look in memory. It can scan the process tree. It can look for behavioral anomalies and unusual activity that shouldn't happen either on this machine or on this particular person's machine um, at all, right? And so it can get a lot more contextual and provide a much higher quality alert than simply looking at the logs and running a query across it. And so we've done this at Microsoft in identity, so Defender for Identity and Azure AD Identity Protection, so built into the cloud or an add-on for your on-premises AD, ADFS, et cetera. For Office, not only the inbound email, scan, sandboxing, detonation chamber, et cetera, but cloud apps and also cloud resources with Azure Defender, looking at storage accounts and how do attackers attack that and exploit that, and containers and Azure App Services and IoT as well. Microsoft recently acquired a company called CyberX, and we now have Azure Defender for IoT. Kind of a bit of a confusing name because it does cover IoT, but it also covers OT or SCADA and ICS to make high quality detections off the very unique environments of very old computers that are controlling physical processes. It could be 30, 50-year-old electronics sometimes on 100-year-old machines. So really getting those high quality alerts on the different asset types and then feeding those into the SIM and being able to do the correlation across gives the analyst a much better chance of not only not spending the time with false positives, so they're able to grab the new alerts very quickly, but also being able to not be tired out, so you can have the meantime to remediate there. And SOAR is one of the key technologies in there, but another key enabler is the threat intelligence. John, did you want to kind of add some color there?
Yeah, so I get a lot of customers asking me how they can access Microsoft's threat intelligence. And what's interesting is we have threat intelligence built into all of these tools, right? So Microsoft has access to high fidelity telemetry from the use of our products and services. And we have a lot of different products and services. So we get identity telemetry, endpoint telemetry, behavioral telemetry, and so on. And we're able to leverage machine learning and AI at scale to use this telemetry to establish these baselines for normal behavior, malicious behavior, healthy code, malware, and so on. And it's not just the telemetry, right? We have the threat intel teams who are managing a threat intel platform. We've got our threat intel teams that are focused on learning about nation state actors and studying malware. We're doing dark web research. We are, again, building up those malware databases and so on. We take this information and we are, again, using at scale this machine learning AI, the behavioral analytics that you've talked about and so on, processing that information, analyzing it, and pushing the results in through those tools. So people using those tools already have access to Microsoft Threat Intelligence.
Yeah, and it makes it a lot easier because you don't have to spend your time, just like you wouldn't have to integrate tools, you don't have to integrate the threat intelligence and then kind of correlate it yourself. It's built in. And one thing I want to emphasize that you mentioned early on in there is the diversity of threat intelligence, because we've learned it's not just volume. I mean, we get 8.5 trillion signals a day of potential context that's interesting. Could be used in security for baselining normal, et cetera, all the way up to, hey, this is an absolutely bad piece of code, malware, et cetera. But it's the diversity of it, so that we, looking at it from an endpoint perspective, an antivirus perspective, a network perspective, an identity perspective, it allows you to sort of have a better chance of catching, this sort of unicorn as it goes by, the attacker, because you can, see a picture of the mane or the hoofs or the tail, and it also helps you get a better chance of detecting, but you also get a bigger picture overall when you do it, as opposed to purely network or purely identity sort of signal. So it's very important to have that diversity, we've learned, to make those detections much better.
And of course, the other question that people ask is about Sentinel. Are we using Sentinel, this SOAR thing that you're about to talk about? I think it's important to talk about how we are integrating the XDR and the SIM into Sentinel.
Oh, absolutely. And the SOAR technology is so critical. So, I mean, SOAR just, because it's automation, because it's automating the tasks that the analysts don't like doing, right? Or that they need done, but they don't want to have to do manually each time. it's a huge, morale time saver and productivity as well, and it helps keep the organization safe because you can do so many more investigations of so many more alerts and incidents when it's already done for you. And which is the case of sort of the automatic incident response or auto IR technology built into Microsoft 365 Defender. It basically automatically investigates because it knows those data sources, those assets really well through the XDR, and then says, hey, we figured out how to clean this up. Why don't you, as a human, approve this? And you can auto approve it next time once you're comfortable with that. And so that's one of the ways that SOAR is implemented. And then in Sentinel, which is our SIM, SOAR, UEBA, et cetera, cloud-based solution, there's a slightly different flavor of SOAR, which is really about orchestrating all these different tools and making sure it shows up in the Teams channel, the Slack channel. It's automatically initiating firewall rules to block these bad IPs we discovered during the incident, et cetera. So there's a lot more flexibility as opposed to sort of pre-baked and done for you. And there's a lot of community queries that are also being added to Sentinel. So that's kind of the key technology elements of it. And so the next piece here is people, right? Because when you look at how difficult these challenges are, nobody can be an expert in everything. And so it's always important to be able to bring in those external experts that are specialists, whether it be nation states or particular industries, et cetera. And so Microsoft has some, built-in services like Microsoft Threat Experts and, of course, an incident response and recovery team, DART, you may have heard of them, that can help. But we also partner very closely with managed detection response and MSSP providers as well, to make sure that, organizations can have experts that know these technologies and tools and either take some of the load off of them, or to sort of consult and be a point of escalation as well. So Microsoft is very much investing in the ecosystem to help all of these, to help our customers either directly or through enabling these experts to be able to take full advantage of our tools and technologies.
So this is great. If people are interested in learning more or want to consult some more resources, we do have our CDOC blog series out there that we put together, I think, over the last year or so, co-authored with some folks from inside our Cyber Defense Operations Center. It's a multi-part series that covers everything from lessons learned around technology and training people and different skills that you'd need in a CDOC. And I think our last entry in that series was on the art of hunting. So I think there's some good information in there.
Yeah, and there's a couple more resources as well. So we'll have the links there at the end. Because there's so much more to talk about security operations, but we don't want to sit here boring you for a couple of hours. And so with that, we'd love to thank you for watching. Really appreciate your time and attention. Hopefully this was informative and helpful for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.